Welcome everyone to KVEC, Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperatives Autism Hour with Ms. Kim Howard from the Kentucky Autism Training Center. Today's topic is going to be antecedent-based practices. And Ms. Kimberly, I'll let you have it at this time. And thanks everyone for joining us, and enjoy our session this evening.
Hi, everyone. I am Kim Howard, and I work for Kentucky Autism Training Center. So we're going to talk about antecedent-based interventions. Thank you for joining us. All right, we're going to talk about antecedent-based interventions. The nice thing about antecedent-based interventions is that they have lots and lots of research behind them. It is an evidence-based practice for students with autism. And what antecedent-based interventions are is it's actually a small collection of strategies. So it's not just one thing, but it's options. Choices are so nice, is what I will say. Choices are very nice to have. And so we want you to have good choices. And let me ask you this. This is October. I will tell you, this is the point to where most of us are feeling the strain of interfering behaviors that affect our ability to teach, that affect our kids' ability to learn. And so this is where antecedent-based interventions come into play. And so they are environmental modifications that are made to kind of prompt that learner. We set up the conditions in the classroom, and we prompt the learner with autism or other disabilities to hopefully be less likely that they're going to engage in whatever that interfering behavior is. So antecedent-based interventions are what we're talking about today. So it is evidence-based practice for anyone that is school age, literally preschool all the way through high school. And I'll tell you, if this is still effective at high school age, then it's still going to be effective into adulthood. It's just going to maybe change the way that it looks and hopefully grow and mature as that student ages. Goal is to increase on-task behaviors. So we're going to talk about this briefly, and I will say ABC and ABC data collection is its whole own giant training sometimes. Antecedent, this is that ABC contingency. So antecedent is the type of consequences, is the type of strategies that we're talking about. But when we think about being a behavior detective, we have to figure out, why are the kids doing what they're doing? Probably it's not to drive you over the edge, although it can feel that way sometimes. Probably there is some sort of motivation and purpose behind whatever is happening. And so we have to be behavior detectives to figure out what is happening and why that is happening. So antecedent is anything that happens right before that behavior occurs. B is the behavior. Insert whatever behavior is appropriate for your student or happening. This could be loud pencil tapping. That's something that I had a conversation about this week. It could be falling in the floor. It could be a meltdown. It could be aggressive behavior. It could be biting. I don't know. Insert whatever behavior you like. And then the C is the consequences. What happens after that behavior occurs? Because consequences probably are feeding that behavior. Behavior happens for a reason. And it will talk. Behavior talks if we can take some time and listen to it. So that's all I'm going to say about this. But know to use the antecedent-based interventions, you need to have you need to think about this first. Why is this behavior happening? Because we don't want to make the behavior worse by accident, and we don't want to reinforce the behavior with adult actions, which is unfortunately very possible to do. Antecedent-based interventions come down to some of these types of things. Having clear behavioral expectations. So making sure that your student knows exactly what you're asking them to do. And this is the catch, especially for MSD classrooms, or especially for our students with complex needs that are working with multiple adults in the school setting. One of the classrooms that I taught in, and I was a classroom teacher for several years. And so I have used antecedent-based interventions in my home. I have used antecedent-based interventions absolutely in my classroom. I use these today in my Sunday school classroom. I use these with all kinds of people in my life. So these are just good things to know. But when we're working with multiple adults, you have to be consistent across adults. Hopefully that will fall over to home, but if not, be consistent at school. It will very much matter. So set those clear behavioral expectations and make sure that all of the adults that you have in your classroom are on board and following the same behavioral expectations. It has to look the same for you as it does for your classroom assistant, as it does for the occupational therapist, whoever it is. You have to be on the same team. All right, priming. Priming is telling kids, it's like priming the pump. If you're a mechanic or work in some of those kinds of areas, priming is telling kids what they need to do right before they're going to do it. So it's reminding them of the rules and those behavioral expectations that we just talked about right before they need to know them. So I will give you an example with my classroom. We used priming. The last classroom that I taught in was a lovely school, but their playground bordered a cow pasture that was an electrified fence. And the last few years that I was there, the farmer decided to move his ginormous bull into this pasture. And there was no fence between the barbed wire electric fence and the bull, except for the cow, the actual electric fence. There was no barrier between the playground and this cow pasture and fence. So we had to make a rule for my classroom. I had an unfortunate incident of a child being shocked because they grabbed the fence. Because what do little kids do, especially kids with disabilities? They grab onto the things that they find. So kiddo grabbed the fence, kid got shocked. I was running to prevent it, and I wasn't fast enough. I couldn't catch up to them because they were big, giant playground, large area. And this was not a kid that I would have expected to run over and grab the fence, but sometimes there you are. So my school made a rule that people were not allowed, you weren't supposed to be near the fence. So we made a new rule that the kids had to stay where the wood chips were. Unfortunately, there was a lovely expanse of grass that was perfect for kicking a ball and running back and forth and playing tag on directly at the bull fence. But we could not play there anymore. So in order to prime my classroom, I brought in wood chips at the beginning of every school year. I brought in wood chips and I taught my kids, these are wood chips, because a lot of my kids did not know what wood chips were. These are wood chips. We touched the wood chips. We felt the wood chips. We went out to the playground a couple of times with just us because I didn't want the distraction of our recess would have 100 to 150 kids at it at a time, right? Large amount of kids, lots of distractions. So we would go up by ourselves a few times and we would walk the border of where the kids were allowed to play. We would touch the wood chips. I would emphasize all of the playground equipment is exactly where you can play, or you can play on the basketball goal area, but we cannot put our feet in the grass. So every day after this, lots of instruction at the beginning of the school year, I would fade that out to every day as we were walking up the hill to the playground. I would say, all right, guys, what's the rules for the playground? The rule is we only play where the wood chips are. For a few of my kids, I would keep wood chips and I would let them fill them every day. But priming is essentially telling kids what they need to know right now before they need to know it, not expecting them to keep that in their memory forever, but just a quick reminder every time they're going to do it as appropriate. Hopefully, eventually you don't have to do that every time, but for some kids, you might. Behavior momentum is another great antecedent-based intervention. I think sometimes that I know for a fact that unfortunately, sometimes for many of our students, they experience frequent failure. Does anyone work with students that won't try anymore? The student is not willing to try anything new. The student is not willing to try anything that they think will be hard for them. I'm seeing a lot of that. And I saw a lot of that as a teacher, especially when I taught older students, upper elementary, middle and high school ages. The kids have failed a lot and they've experienced a lot of unfortunate failures. So what behavior momentum does is it teaches the adults, and this can be, I'm going to say teacher a lot, but insert whatever adult you feel appropriate. It could be a classroom aide, it could be occupational therapist, speech therapist, whoever you like. The adult is going to give the child something that they know how to do before you ask them to do something that is new to them or something that's going to be hard to them. So my example for this is when I taught elementary age, I had a fourth grader who was out in the regular classroom most of the day, or actually all of the day except for 20 minutes. She spent all of the whole day with her peers, academically was on level for everything except for math. For math, she was a couple of years behind. And so she had a lot of anxiety in math class every day. So in the morning, one of the things that I did, and the behavior momentum piece is every morning, she met with me in the library prior to the school day starting. And I pre-taught her the day's math lesson, right? I pre-taught her the day's math lesson. That's not necessarily an antecedent-based intervention, but the antecedent-based intervention is before I showed her the new math every day, we started out with a math problems that I knew she knew how to do. So every day she was really good at some multi-digit addition. She could do that pretty fast. So every day we would do a multi-digit addition or multi-digit subtraction problem that I felt pretty confident that she could get right, because I wanted to start with success before I asked her to do something that was going to be a challenge or be hard. Now, for my younger students or my students that have more cognitive impact, sometimes this looks like asking them to touch their elbow. Touch your elbow. Sometimes it means that I'm teaching colors and I know the child knows the color blue and the color red. So I ask them to identify blue and red before I move on to something that I know they don't know how to do. It can be very simple, or you're modifying this to be appropriate for the student. But good options, good things to think about. Give them something. Behavioral momentum is making sure that you give them something that they can do correctly before I ask them to do something that I know will be a challenge for them. So just thinking that through. All right, other antecedent-based interventions. Place specific demands. Use less words. Literally, use less words. If you're having to say things over and over, it might be a great place that you consider a visual support. And we'll talk about those in a bit, but placing specific demands. So saying sit and pointing at the chair versus saying sit down in your chair and show me you are ready to work. That's a lot of words, especially if this is a kid that is maybe already upset, or this is a kid who lives in anxiety land, or a kid that has ADHD type issues that they may not hear all of the words that you are saying. So sometimes less is more, and using less words is the appropriate response as the adult. So thinking about that, how can I place specific demands versus saying lots of words? Another great antecedent-based intervention is offering choice. Choice is powerful. Choice is really powerful. And then thinking through adult controlled choices. I like to always point that out. I'm not saying that students should have all the control. That is definitely not what I'm saying, but I'm saying think about places that you can offer them the opportunity to make choices and it doesn't cost you anything, essentially. So I'm going to talk about some examples of those. All right, so how might you offer choice? So some of the ways that I've done it, and if you have a way that you offer students choice and you want to put that in the chat window, feel free. Some of the things that I always think about is maybe it's order of instructional task. When I taught in a self-contained unit and I was working with a student, and it's just me and him, and we're going to work around, I know that I have 2 or 3 tasks that I'm going to ask the student to do with me right now as we're sitting here. Then which one do you want to do first, right? If it doesn't matter what order we do these 3 tasks in, then let them pick, right? I had a student that was very opposed to coming, and he did not like teacher time. He did not want to come and work with me. And the tasks were very short, but he did not enjoy that part of the day. And so one of the ways that I gave him back some control in that environment was As long as it didn't matter the order of the task, then I let him pick. He could totally choose which one to go first. And it was a student that when I first tried it, I thought, I'm not sure that he can make that choice or that he will understand what we're trying to do. Very much autism level 3 student, non-speaking, a person who is using limited communication, lots of things happening for this child, but it was powerful. He totally spent, the first time I did it, he spent about 5 minutes looking at each individual task and putting them back in the basket before he picked the one that he wanted to do. I wasn't sure that it was going to work at all. I would just tell you, I was sitting there thinking this is going to be a train wreck. I'm not sure that he understands what I'm asking him to do. But he totally got it, and he dug through those tasks. And the interesting thing for me was that when we started doing this, I could see the kind of tasks that he preferred, and I could see the kind of tasks that he did not prefer. And so I don't want to do away with those non-preferred tasks, but I could make sure that I didn't do a session with him to where it was all non-preferred tasks, or it was all things that he did not necessarily want to do. It gave me information about him that I didn't already have. Maybe it's a choice of materials. So I have had students that have high levels of anxiety and have autism. And so one of the things that I would do with them was, the choice wasn't to do the work or not, but the choice was, do you want to write with a purple pencil or write with the purple pencil or write with the yellow pencil? So what color of pencil are we writing with? Or maybe it's a choice of, are you going to write with a pencil or a pen? Are you going to use a marker? If it doesn't matter, then maybe that's the choice. Maybe it's a choice of where you're going to sit. Do you want to do this work at the kidney table, or do you want to do this work at the round table? Because I don't care, right? As long as we do it somewhere, it doesn't matter to me. Maybe kids should always have a choice of reinforcers, right? We'll talk about reinforcers at the end, but reinforcers, absolutely, students should always have the choice. I had the experience of working with a student who had an autism diagnosis as well as ADHD diagnosis and oppositional defiant disorder diagnoses. And so one of the things that we did with him, so basically you couldn't place a direct demand on him. Everything had to be presented as a choice. And so in his first grade classroom, he had 2 desks, one on the left side of the room and one on the right side of the room. And this is an extreme situation. Hopefully you don't have that. But you can go extreme with this if you need to. Hopefully you do not. So when he would come into the classroom, which desk are you going to sit at? The left desk or the right desk? Because really, it didn't matter which desk he sat at. He just needed to sit down and be prepared to work. So we basically presented everything as a choice all day long, which can be exhausting, but it really made a huge difference. It just took some initial thinking through and planning on the parts of the adults in that setting. So other things to think about with antecedent-based interventions is consistent schedule for your classroom or the flow of your school day. Hopefully your students have a visual schedule. I do think we're all using visual schedules, and think about it this way. As an adult, I know how my day I know the general flow of my day. I don't know every single minute, and I can deal with that. But if you're a person who has high anxiety, or a student who, especially our young students that don't really have a lot of consistent experience with what is school, what does this look like? What in the world are we doing here? Structuring your day can be really critical, and structuring the day is calming for those students. And if you can't control your whole day, and we know probably you cannot, start and end your class the same way every day. Maybe if it's just a session, maybe it's your reading class, maybe you're doing morning calendar, start and end it the same way, but maybe the middle changes sometimes. I think those are good plans for how to begin building in some of that structure for our students. Types of visual supports, body movement, right? So gesturing. We're utilizing things like environmental cues. If you drive a car, if you're driving a car, you are hopefully you're paying attention to things like stop signs. In our school building, environmental cues come down to signs on the bathroom, signs on the classroom door. How are we organizing ourselves? I don't know about you all, but I still have a paper calendar. I call it my master calendar because sometimes my electronic calendar goes really well. And sometimes things in there get jumbled. Maybe this could be technology based, like, like my nice electronic calendar. Maybe it's specialized communication aids. So some sort of behavior script, or picture story, social skills, social narrative type based activities. Those are all, there's a lot of variety for visual supports. Visual supports have some of the largest amount of research behind them. And visual supports are a part of antecedent-based interventions, but they're also their whole own evidence-based practice for students with autism. And they are effective across all age ranges. You do have to teach them, and figuring out which visual support to use, especially if we're talking schedules, or picture-based communication type things, can be a little bit challenging for some students. You have to kind of experiment and figure out, am I using real, like actual pictures of my classroom? Am I using the example on my right side of the screen is an object schedule? Am I using an object schedule? Maybe this is a student that's not yet ready for actual pictures. Am I using more board maker or PEX style images? There are tons and tons of choices out there. It's figuring out which one works right for your student. And if you've never been on do2learn.com, they have some good free visual options, a lot of different free visual supports that you can see if they're right for your classroom, and then decide that. And the other thing with schedules are some students are ready for a whole day schedule. And like this example, this schedule is for maybe it's a partial day. It might be a couple hours, it might be half the day. I'm not really sure, but this is just smaller based on the student. This is a part day. This is another example of a part day. A visual schedule can look like a million different things, but this is a way to kind of give back control for some students, and to give the adults. I will tell you, I use my visual schedule as a person. We talked about it like it was its own person, because if there was something on the schedule that the student didn't want to do, I would say, I'm so sorry that you don't want to do math today, but it's on the schedule, and it's on the schedule. We have to do it. So I would blame the schedule for things sometimes. It was a way to unshoulder some of the blame for activities that students didn't like. I only had a couple of students over the years that were like, wait a minute, Miss Kim, you're the one who's putting these schedule cards on here, so this is still your fault. But most of the time, my students would be like, I know it's on that schedule and I got to do it. So it became its own person. This could also be written. If you have students that are fluent readers, and they're reading and comprehending, maybe you're working with high school age or older students, a written schedule. I don't know about you all, but I have reached the age of sticky notes. Sticky notes are now holding my life together. I need my own visual schedule, my own visual reminder sometime of exactly what this needs to be. This could also be if you have a student that is tech-based or technology-oriented. This could be, I have a student that is using a schedule on his iPhone. It goes with him. It's a disabled phone, so he's not making phone calls, but he is using the schedule on inside of the time, the clock that's on there. They set timers with different chimes based on what they're supposed to be doing. And that's how he's moving through his day. That he reads pretty well. You can also, there's some options to upload images in there. So he's utilizing a phone-based schedule, which has worked really well for him. That might not work for everyone, but so it's about finding the right option for you. So these are just different examples of what this could look like. I work with a teacher that told me years ago, she didn't know, I had a student that was going into a science class, and she told me, she goes, I don't know what the schedule is until that day. And so she would write out the schedule on an index card for him. She knew, she did follow my guideline of starting the same way and ending the science class the same way every day. So they started and ended the same way every day, but the middle, it really varied. There was a lot of variability in that. So she would write him a very quick index card schedule of what to expect in that science class every day, just on an index card. Nothing fancy, nothing fancy. It doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to be functional. This is meant to go at the top of a desk. So this is a visual support that has a first then board on it. It has some kind of cue cards, behavior cue cards. Please have safe hands, quiet voice, listen. I'm going to say these are a lot of instructions. So this might be too many things for a kid to be working on, or it might be the right amount. It just depends on your student. These are bus rules. I've had a lot of phone calls about buses lately. What's the bus? What needs to happen on the bus? Here are the things you should be doing. Maybe you need to communicate about medical. I know probably you guys aren't dealing with that as much. It has come up sometimes occasionally in school with kids that are sick. And I have seen these in a few nurses' offices that are somewhat helpful for a lot of students. So I think someone talked about a countdown timer. This is my version of a countdown timer. It is just a piece of yellow cardstock and some index cards that you can see my bad handwriting on. Cut those index cards in half, and you literally are pulling off 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I use this in a classroom for a child that would not leave the playground. It is inconvenient to carry it out there. Hers was on a lanyard clip. I would carry it around my neck or keep it in my pocket, and I would pull it out. All right, you've got 5 more things you can do on the playground, and then we have to go in. It's time to transition in. 5 might be too many for your student. Maybe your countdown just needs to be 3. You can adjust that, and these can look 100 different ways, all of which are okay. Other visual supports, stop signs can be really important. I kept stop signs on my floor. By my teacher station, I kept a stop sign on the back of my classroom door, and I taught some of my students that were eloping. We worked on, if the stop sign was up, then they could not run out the door, and it took some time to teach them that. We played a game, so we played basically red light, green light, but we had a stop sign and a go sign. And we played it in the gym, and they had an adult holding their hand, and when I would hold up the stop sign or someone else would hold up the stop sign, then we would make sure that they were stopping and they were queuing in to that card. And I had a little stop sign in my hand, and I'd be like, look, stop. I'm really emphasizing that this is a stop sign and we are stopping, to help them make that connection. Maybe it's a visual support for social, emotional, and calming. So breathe in through the nose. So smell the flower, blow out the candle, or blow the pinwheel, whichever version you like. Pause button. I've done a lot of teaching kids the stop sign, but pause is something that kids are, especially our kids that spend a lot of times on game systems and video game type settings, or spending a lot of times on not YouTubes, but YouTube. The pause button can be pretty effective. I've used pause with a student recently they have a hard time transitioning from the activity. So they are placing a pause on it. It's going into a bin or a box, and then they come back to it later. It's an activity that they can come back to. I had a teacher call me a few weeks ago, and she had been using the pause button in her classroom. She had taught the students this means pause. So if you're doing pause means I'm stopping it for now, but I'm coming back to it later. So you have to make sure that it's something you can come back to later. She paused an argument with a student. I was pretty impressed with that. She told me that she had a student that was having a verbal argument with her. And so she threw down the pause button and said, we're going to pause this right now, and we're going to go on to lunch, and we'll come back to this when they get back. And it gave the student a chance to calm down, and it gave her a chance to calm down, which I thought was really highly effective for both of them. And then when they came back, she'd had a little bit of time to come up with a solution, which may not always be possible, and was able to negotiate with that student for a much better outcome than what had happened for them in the past. Waiting is hard. So this is a wait cue card, or help. How are our students asking for those things, or how are we asking them for those things? Lanyards. I can't say enough about visual cue cards. These are freebies that you can find on Victories in Autism, and that is on that website. Visual cue cards these are for adults. These aren't something that I'm giving to a student and asking them to communicate to me. And I say that because I've had a few people be a little bit confused about that. But these are adult-based cue cards. So the adult in the classroom, whoever that is, are using this as a picture prompt, basically, to tell the child, all right, be quiet, or stop. They're going to give you lots of options for words. Maybe you don't need all of them. Just put the ones on there that you do need. I had a student that we had to add feet on the floor. We had to add no climbing. We had to add a few of our own, which we basically made up with a Google image and an index card and just added them. So these are nice because you can edit them to look like whatever you need. Another visual support that you might consider is how are kids expressing their emotions, right? This is a 5-point scale. 5-point scale, it's called the Incredible 5-point scale. There are a ton of free printable versions of this. Some of them are made to match characters that students might like. So I've seen them for Spider-Man and the Hulk. Lots of good options. So a 1 basically means I keep on doing whatever it is I need to do. And a 5 means that and you can edit these to mean whatever you need it to mean for the student. 5 means I'm upset, I'm mad, I'm angry. In this case, this example, the kid is anxious. And then the last category is the important one. What can I do? And the goal is, as the educator, that we are catching kid at a 3. Right? We're catching our students when they hit a 3. So we're not hitting a 5. And we have options in that number, in the number 3 of this point scale, that we can help keep our students from reaching a 5, which won't always be possible no matter how many good things you have in place, but it will help reduce it, which is definitely the goal. First then is meant to be taught, and you have to start out with highly preferred activities. First then boards in the beginning need to be things that the student likes. So when I've used this I spent a week or a few days at the beginning of the year or whenever I introduce it, and I will say, I had a student that came in, he really just liked to do the computer and the iPad. So those first few days of school, on his first then board, it said first computer, then iPad. Then it said first iPad, then computer, like we just flipped it back and forth. And then over a few days, we started adding in the things that we need them to do. First math, then iPad, right? First work, and then whatever choice they would like. So if you've tried these and they didn't work, go back and try it again with just highly preferred activities for several sessions, depending on your students, right? How long you need to do that for. But you're teaching them that it means good things are going to happen here, and you're teaching them how to use the first then board. So something to think about. All right, reinforcement, the last piece of antecedent-based interventions. Reinforcement is anything that you can do that's going to make someone's behavior more likely to behave that way again, right? They're going to repeat the behavior that they just did. So there's a lot of components to reinforcement for students with autism, especially. Sometimes they are not reinforced with the typical, they're not reinforced with typical things like you would expect their peers to be. Social praise may not work for them. Reinforcement can look very different for students with autism. It may be very individualized to them. So I always tell people, if you're working with students with severe and complex needs, then keep a list of whatever that student's reinforced by. Even if they stop being reinforced by it now, keep a list, because we all get worn out with, having the same Coke every day, right? We get tired of that same reinforcer, so we move on to new things. But keep that list, because every now and then we'll cycle back to that, whatever that was. And then the other piece with reinforcement is, are you giving them enough reinforcement for the level of the activity that they're asking you to do? So I always say to people, would you run 1 mile for $50? If I offered you $50, would you run 1 mile? For me, that's an absolute zero chance. If you say, Kim, I got this $50 burning a hole in my pocket, but I will give it to you if you will run 1 mile. I'm not running a mile for $50. I'm not getting off my couch for $50 probably. unless maybe there's like an ice cream sundae attached to it, in which case I might get off my couch, but I'm not running for 1 mile for $50. But if I said, would you run 1 mile for $5,000? Would you get off your couch and run 1 mile? Well, I'm going to tell you, I would at least try. I might die running that mile, but if you've got $5,000 out there, I'm going to give it my best. I will probably try it for that. And the same thing happens with our students. Sometimes what we're asking them to do feels like that running 1 mile for, we're asking them to do something really big or really hard in the way that they perceive it, even if we don't perceive that as really hard or a really big ask. So thinking about, is this the appropriate level of reinforcement? Unfortunately, for many of our students with autism, they start out with their primary reinforcers are food-based, which are nice on one hand in that when you have a food reinforcer, you eat it and it disappears, but it can also be bad because we don't want to be feeding a student a whole bag of M&Ms or a whole bag of Skittles. When I was in the classroom, I would spend part of my Saturdays splicing. If you have a pill cutter, I can tell you all about cutting Skittles into 4 pieces. It is possible, but that depends on your student. Hopefully you're not stuck in food-based reinforcers, but a lot of our students will start out there. Break them into small pieces if they will work for that, and they may not. You'll have to think that one through. Thinking about what will the child work for. If I can have access to that and then I can control their access to it, then I can hopefully use that reinforcement to sort of pay them essentially for the things that I'm asking them to do in the classroom, which is a powerful, powerful motivator. All right, these are the resources. Victories in Autism, tons of free visual supports, lots of good options there around behavior, but also just things that you could utilize in your classroom. The IIDC Indiana, lots of great visual support options. And then also this Reading Rockets was another good resource.
Thank you, Ms. Kim, for your wonderful presentation as usual. I really appreciate it. Please check out theholler.org. Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening. Be safe, be kind, be exceptional. We'll holler at you later.